Have you ever noticed how some mothers seem unable to let go of their sons? Not in obvious ways, not through strict rules or loud demands, but through something quieter, something harder to name. A mother who calls every day, a mother who feels hurt when her son spends more time with his partner, a mother who says, "You're all I have," with a smile that somehow feels heavier than the words themselves. We're taught that maternal love is pure. So why do some relationships between mothers and sons feel less like love and more like emotional gravity? Why does a son sometimes feel responsible for his mother's happiness? Why does a mother struggle to let her son become fully independent? And why can a bond that begins with care slowly turn into something that feels like obligation? The answer is more complicated than most realize, because what looks like control is often loneliness. What looks like guilt is often fear. Imagine a young mother holding her son for the first time. At that moment, something extraordinary happens inside the brain. Hormones surge, neural pathways strengthen, the infant becomes the center of an entire emotional universe. But here's the thing. The same system that creates connection can sometimes create attachment that becomes difficult to loosen, especially when emotional needs go unmet elsewhere. Most emotionally dependent mothers aren't consciously manipulating anyone. They are simply trying to fill emotional spaces they don't know how to fill. Spaces created by loneliness, disappointment, or abandonment, by marriages that slowly lost intimacy, by dreams that never became reality, by identities that became smaller over time. For some mothers, motherhood gradually stops being one role among many. It becomes the role, the identity around which everything revolves. But identities can become traps when they become too narrow. Imagine building your entire sense of self around one thing. What happens when the child who once needed you every hour suddenly needs you less? For many mothers, this transition is bittersweet. Yet for others, it feels like losing a part of themselves. Psychologists often talk about attachment theory. Most people think it only affects children, but adults have attachment patterns too. Some individuals develop anxious attachment styles. They become highly sensitive to distance, to separation, to emotional change, a delayed text message, a canceled visit. To an anxious nervous system, these events trigger deep fears of abandonment. The sun isn't just busy, the sun is leaving. The sun isn't just growing, the sun is disappearing. Emotions often respond to perceived threats, not actual ones. That's why these relationships can feel so confusing. The behavior seems disproportionate because the real battle is happening inside old emotional wounds. Human beings have a profound need to feel seen. Many mothers spend years receiving those feelings through caregiving. When children are young, mothers are needed constantly. Every day reinforces the message, "You matter, you are important." Then something changes. The child grows, the dependence fades, the center of gravity shifts. Being needed and being loved are not the same thing. Yet over time, they can become emotionally intertwined. Some mothers aren't afraid of losing their sons. They're afraid of losing the feeling of importance that came with motherhood. Now let's talk about emotional enmeshment. It means boundaries become blurred. Two people's emotional worlds overlap. Imagine two trees growing so close together that their branches become tangled. At first, they appear stronger, but over time, neither tree can grow freely. Every movement affects the other. Every change feels dangerous. This is where many sons begin experiencing confusion. They love their mothers, but they also feel exhausted and guilty. When they prioritize their own lives, they feel selfish. When they prioritize their mothers, they feel trapped. The expectations were communicated through disappointment, through sadness, through subtle guilt, and through silence. Sometimes silence is communication. Sometimes silence says, "You've hurt me." Sometimes silence says what words never do. There's rarely a villain, just two people caught inside patterns neither fully understands. Mirror neurons play a role. They allow us to feel echoes of another's emotional state. When someone suffers, your brain reflects it. A son notices his mother's sadness. His nervous system responds. He feels compelled to fix it, to soothe it. He learns an unconscious lesson. My mother's emotional state is my responsibility. This follows him into adulthood. They learn survival through emotional caretaking. The mother and son often don't realize this is happening. Emotionally dependent mothers are often carrying invisible grief. Grief for youth, for changing identities, for relationships that failed. Sometimes the son becomes the safest place to put those emotions, because parental bonds often feel permanent and secure, until one day the relationship is carrying far more weight than it was ever meant to hold. Underneath emotional dependence, there's often a single question. If you no longer need me, will you still choose me? And that question changes everything. Because suddenly the relationship isn't just about a mother and a son, it's about fear, it's about identity, it's about belonging. It's about what happens when love becomes tangled with the need for reassurance. And maybe you've seen this dynamic before. A mother becomes upset when her son moves away, not because she wants to stop him, at least not consciously, but because every mile feels like evidence that she is becoming less central to his life. A son starts dating someone seriously. A mother feels unexpectedly threatened, not because she dislikes the partner, but because another relationship is now occupying emotional space she once held. The surface story says one thing, the deeper story says another. And this is where it gets interesting. The conflict is rarely about the actual event. It's about what the event symbolizes. Distance symbolizes abandonment. Independence symbolizes rejection. Boundaries symbolize loss. Of course, none of those interpretations are necessarily true. But emotions don't always speak the language of logic. They speak the language of meaning. When researchers study family systems, they often find something important. Human behavior doesn't happen in isolation. Every relationship exists inside a larger emotional ecosystem. If one person changes, the entire system reacts. Think about a mobile hanging above a baby's crib. Touch one piece, every other piece moves. Families work similarly. When a son begins setting healthier boundaries, the family system often experiences discomfort. Not because boundaries are wrong, because change creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates anxiety. A mother who has relied heavily on her son for emotional support may suddenly feel destabilized. The son may feel guilty. The family may experience tension. For a while, everyone feels worse. And that's the part nobody talks about. Healthy change often feels uncomfortable before it feels healthy. Growth rarely arrives wrapped in comfort. It usually arrives disguised as conflict, disappointment, awkward conversations, and difficult emotions, which is why so many people return to old patterns. Old patterns feel familiar, even when they hurt. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. Emotional dependence creates an invisible contract, a contract nobody consciously signs. The contract sounds something like this: I will make you feel needed, and in return, you will make me feel important. At first, this arrangement seems harmless, even loving. Both people receive something valuable: connection, security, purpose, belonging. But eventually, the cost appears, because neither person can fully grow while protecting the contract. The mother struggles to release, the son struggles to separate. And separation is not abandonment. This distinction matters more than most people realize. A tree does not betray its roots by growing taller. A river does not reject its source by flowing forward. Growth is not disloyalty. Growth is the natural continuation of life. Yet emotionally dependent relationships often interpret growth as betrayal, and that's where suffering begins. Many sons raised in these environments carry invisible burdens into adulthood. They become chronic people pleasers. They struggle with guilt. They find it difficult to say no. They feel responsible for emotions that don't belong to them. Someone is disappointed. They feel responsible. Someone is upset. They feel responsible. Someone feels lonely. They feel responsible. It's as if they walk through life carrying emotional luggage that was never theirs to carry. The strange part? They may not even notice. The burden feels normal, familiar, expected, like a fish unaware of the water surrounding it. And this is why awareness can feel so shocking. The moment someone recognizes the pattern, an entirely different reality becomes visible. They begin asking questions. Why do I feel guilty for having needs? Why do I feel anxious when I disappoint someone? And often, those questions lead back to early relationship dynamics, not with blame, not with resentment, with understanding. Because understanding is different from accusation. Understanding a pattern doesn't mean condemning the people inside it. Real life is rarely that simple. Most emotionally dependent mothers are not villains. Most are human beings carrying unmet emotional needs. Human beings trying to find security, significance, trying to avoid loneliness, trying to protect connections that matter deeply to them. Hurtful behavior can emerge from pain. Control can emerge from fear. Clinging can emerge from grief. That doesn't make the behavior healthy, but it makes it understandable. And understanding creates compassion. Compassion for others, and compassion for yourself. You are allowed to care deeply without carrying someone else's emotional world. You are allowed to love without rescuing. You are allowed to support without sacrificing yourself. Because healthy love is not measured by how much of yourself you lose. Healthy love is measured by how much truth the relationship can hold. The truth that two people can remain connected while also remaining separate. Boundaries do not destroy love, they protect it. Emotional dependence is not the same thing as love. Love says, I want you to flourish. Fear says, I need you to stay. Imagine a mother standing at the edge of a shoreline. For years, her son has been the small boat anchored beside her. Then one day, the boat begins moving toward the horizon. Not because it loves the shore less, because boats are meant to sail. Perhaps the deepest form of love is not holding the rope forever. It's trusting that the connection survives even when distance grows. You can honor your love without becoming responsible for their emotional survival. You can create boundaries without creating abandonment. You can choose your own life without betraying the people who raised you. Real love makes freedom possible. Like roots beneath a tree, like a shoreline and a boat, still belonging to each other, even when they're no longer holding on.